Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Cinefile. This week, we are talking about 2012's Lincoln, and this is definitely the first time Jake and I have tried to record this podcast today.
It's been an
Um,
adventure to say the least.
it is it. The weather does not want us talking about
No,
Abraham Lincoln. I'm not sure why, but we've tried. This is like our fifth time trying to record this.
fifth time's the charm. That's how the saying goes,
But
right?
that's how much we wanted to talk about it. It's an excellent movie, but this was Jake's pick this week. So Jake, why did you pick it, and what are your initial thoughts?
So I picked it. One, I love this movie, but it's very timely today because today is marks the 162nd anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War. Civil War begins on this day in 1861 in Charleston, South Carolina, when the Confederates opened fire on Fort Sumter out in the harbor. I'm even wearing my Fort Sumter shirt. Got to go there last summer. It's an incredible place. I'd highly recommend it. So being the Civil
Sponsor
War
us.
nerd that I am, I just couldn't miss this opportunity to talk about the Civil War, and I couldn't think of a better Civil War film to talk about than Lincoln. I love this. It's from one of my favorite directors, Steven Spielberg. It's got a stacked cast, tells a wonderful story. It's based on an incredible book that, of course, I have, Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's a very thick book, and really,
That's like a three C's thick book,
yes. And the funny thing
a
about it
thick boy.
is this movie covers so much, and yet that's how much of the book it covers. This part right here. The rest
Dang.
of this, it doesn't is
So like
untouched.
that's like the last C of the three
It's
C's is thick.
literally it's two
Yeah,
chapters. Two chapters out of 25 is
this
what this
movie is
this
like
movie
two and a
covers.
half hours long, and
Yes.
it was out to two chapters. I mean, it is a little bit different, right? This is historical drama.
Yeah.
This obviously it's there are some fictionalized elements, but I think the thing that really sets it apart and makes it unique is the way in which this movie was shot, and the way
Mm-hmm.
it was written, and the way it was acted. Those are three things that we can get into sequentially.
Yeah.
um, I think, especially, when I was watching this movie, I was texting you like I always do. And I was saying that the lighting in this movie was really, really interesting because it said a lot about how they were trying to portray Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You pointed out that it really there is a lot of backlighting for Lincoln. It's very kind of angelic almost. And you brought this up, and I think it's very poignant that it's creates this like mythicized
Yeah.
quality to Lincoln and how we're portraying him. And I think that's very it's very apt because there is so much that is mythicized about Lincoln in our understanding as Americans, right? We almost understand him more as a legend than as an actual person. Um, it comes about, he was a, a phenomenal leader, a wonderful president. I don't think too many people would balk at that, but he's the president that holds the country together during the Civil War. He's the president that frees the slaves, and he's also the first president to be assassinated while in office. So I think all of these things combine, and really from his death in 1865 to now, we as Americans have created this mythos of Lincoln in our mind that is based on truth and fact, but I think Lincoln is so much times a larger than life character than who he really was as a man, right? We think of him, I think it's similar to the way we think of Kennedy, right? We think of this larger than life character. I guess that's what happens when you get shot as a president and people kind of liked you.
Well, I mean, you could go into all of the different. We could do a whole podcast on all the conspiracy theories about the ties between Lincoln and
Yes.
Kennedy, because what it had like Lincoln had a Kennedy in his cabinet or something,
And
and
Kennedy had a Lincoln
Kennedy
in his
Lincoln in his
cabinet.
cabinet, and which is just crazy. But to kind of get back to that myth kind of
Mm-hmm.
idea, this oh my lord, What?
Okay, that's staying in
It
because
knows. It knows. That was
that was
that was
weird.
stupendous. I my thing's about to die. That's partially why. Um I am folks, each week is a battle between me. It's like the Union and the Confederacy. And I am neither, but no, it's just this weird battle I have between me and I because I have a gimbal and see how it's moving because I
Yeah,
just turned it off
it's always the fun of the podcast is trying to edit my way around Ben. It is malfunctioning gimbal.
every time.
Yes.
Every time.
If there's ever a moment when I seem to be rambling on, and it's in a one shot of me, it's because I'm stalling for time so Ben can fix his
Yes.
gimbal.
And FYI, Jake just cut part of that out, but I know he didn't cut the fact that it just went down and then back up again. So we just took another 5 minutes to try and get this arranged properly. I'm using what is that? Green curry. I have like a thing of green curry. That's right there. Um, but going back to this idea of him as a myth, uh, one of the things that you and I were talking about earlier is uh, the young Mr. Lincoln
Yeah,
movie from
the
1940 with Henry Fonda
mhm.
and directed by John Ford, and how there's this parallel between that movie in 1940 and this movie in 2012.
Mhm.
Um, because it focuses on two different eras, right? The young Mr. Lincoln focuses on his early years or the first two C's of that 3C thick book. And man, if that were more funny, then but it focuses on that earlier part. And this
Mhm.
came out in 1940. This was almost to World War II, getting in the swing of things. Pearl Harbor was what, a year out.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of more rah rah America, right? This down home truth and justice and um, kind of honesty, right? Honest Abe. It kind of focuses on that portion. But then we moved to 2012 in this film, and it focuses more on his latter days and getting the 13th Amendment passed, which is something that, I mean, that's the crux of this movie.
Yeah.
Everything kind of is based on that. And that comes as in the last 2 decades, there's been so much, and rightfully so, emphasis on civil rights
Mhm.
and the importance of that. So I just think it's really interesting that those are parallel, but these both kind of portray him as this mythological figure. I don't know if it's because he didn't get past 56,
Yeah.
um, that they just had this fascination, or the fact that since he did free the slaves, he got that amendment passed, that maybe there's this almost Christ-like
Mhm.
um, comparison. And I don't know. It's just that to me was really fascinating watching this movie.
Yeah, I mean, in one of our failed attempts to get this recorded, you
I know we're gonna sound really smart today because we talked for
this is
maybe already half an hour,
this is the most rehearsed episode of the Cinefile it's ever been. So
and probably ever will be.
probably. Uh, but no, you very astutely pointed out that these are both populist films, and I found that very interesting. Knowing Steven Spielberg made Lincoln, he directed Lincoln, and then knowing that one of his filmmaking idols, really the man who helped him aspire to be a filmmaker, was John Ford, who directed Young Mr. Lincoln. And I think in both movies, they're both populist movies, but take um, a more forceful approach to populism, if you will, right? I think Ford differs, early Ford, of the period of
Like
Young
Model
Mr.
T.
Lincoln. Yeah, no. He takes a more forceful view of populism than, say, his contemporaries like Frank Capra, who um, Capra takes kind of this, wide-eyed, wet behind the ears at um, look at culture and what the populism is all about, the heart and soul of the people, right?
Right.
It's about what the people want. And Capra takes a very optimistic view on that, whereas Ford took a more pessimistic view on it, right? He
which
has
seems
to,
very Ford.
yes. But you see it in Young Mr. Lincoln and other some of his populist films that people have good intentions at heart, but they have to be reminded of those good intentions. They have to be reminded of what is good, what is right, what is just. And really taking that those kind of ideals and looking at this film, right? Lincoln, for being known as Honest Abe, was quite the shrewd politician.
Yeah.
That book is just fascinating, and basically from his time of getting the Republican nomination in 1860 to become president, throughout his whole presidency, is a very shrewd politician. And there's one scene um, early on in the movie when he's having a cabinet meeting and he's explaining this very convoluted roundabout way that he's he had decided in 1862 that he had the wartime authority to free the slaves and issue the
Right.
Emancipation Proclamation, which really didn't free anyone because the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves of those places that are being or that are in active rebellion, which of course the Confederacy didn't give two hoots about the Emancipation
Yeah.
Proclamation. They didn't free anybody, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, this didn't free slaves in the border states like Maryland, like Kentucky, like Delaware, like Missouri. Didn't free those slaves. So really, the Emancipation Proclamation is more of a moral victory, whereas the 13th Amendment is the lasting victory, right? It's what actually created change. Where am I going with all this? It takes
I don't know.
the way that Lincoln goes about this. If you look at it for face value, seems very shrewd and very like backdoor conniving, like yucky politics, right? It's not the good wholesomeness we feel about Lincoln. We don't think about him, you know, promising people jobs in exchange to essentially buy off their votes for the 13th Amendment. We don't think of Lincoln like that. We don't think of him, you know, suspending the writ of habeas corpus, which is what he did, and suspended due process for the border states to maintain, you know, make sure Maryland didn't secede and go descend into chaos and lose Washington. But Lincoln did that, right? And in the same way that Ford's characters have to be reminded about what is good and what is just, I think you see in this film, Lincoln is doing these less than appealing things, you know, backhanded, you know, maneuvers. I mean, it's not
Right. And
egregious.
yeah,
It's not egregious corruption. He doesn't buy anyone
it's
off with actual money, but it's still playing politics, and that can leave a bad taste in your mouth. But he's doing it to achieve a greater good and it create lasting, impactful change for the abolition of slavery. And so I think when you pointed that out, that like blew my mind, honestly, of like how the threads between Ford's populist young Mr. Lincoln and this Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, which I didn't even realize was a populist film until you said it, seeing the strings that connect them, it's fascinating.
oh, I agree. And this is one of the advantages of us doing it 4 times already because yeah, you're right. Like I guess I didn't realize it was a populist film. And once again, when you this is a bit of a sidebar, when you are analyzing a film, you can kind of look at the themes and the threads, like you said, and the through line, and you can identify it as a populist film or as a romantic comedy, these different genres. Um, and these two, it's really interesting analyzing and looking at it through the lens of populism, because you're absolutely right. There's one of the things that I had noticed was the way in which Lincoln speaks, because you obviously mentioned, he's a shrewd politician, and that is seen in this, but he doesn't go about it in a um, heavy-handed way.
Mhm.
He's very soft-spoken and very much talks a lot like his speeches, um, but is just he talks a lot in like parables or kind of stories. Um, but he doesn't to be a shrewd politician, he doesn't in this movie doesn't really have that ego, even
Yeah.
though he's so good at it that he should. He
Mhm.
doesn't really have that ego, and that's one of the reasons why we say that in Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln is kind of a almost angelic Christ-like figure.
Yeah.
Is because the way in which he speaks, and even though he's being shrewd and he's being an OG, he is doing it in such a way that
Mhm.
um, that makes him seem angelic, which is very Christ-like
Yeah.
because Jesus was low key a savage. He was low key a savage, but for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And half of the parables he told, nobody got. And then the other, like, he was
Yeah.
just the Pharisees. Yeah, no, he wasn't about them Pharisees, but like that kind of thing. It's just so cool to see these parallels
Yeah.
that
Which you talk about Lincoln being Christ-like. That is a common comparison that people have made since his death. Um, because if you look at just looking at the calendar in 1865, Lee surrenders to Grant on April the 9th. That's Good Friday, or excuse me, that's Palm Sunday that year, right? Lincoln is shot at Ford's Theater on April the 14th. That's Good Friday that year. And so
right.
there
And
was
3 days
just
later he rises again.
Lincoln did not rise again. He's not the vampire hunter stalking out there hunting vampires. Get out of here with all that crap.
Yeah,
But
that's like blasphemy to you.
yeah, but people, he was seen, to African Americans held in bondage, he was seen as a savior, right? And even to white people, to people that wanted to see the Union preserved, he saved the Union. He saved the United States as we know it. And
Right.
so that I think also plays a big part in how we remember Lincoln is the fact that like he is almost up there with Jesus in how we remember him.
Right. Yeah. I think another one of the things, kind of talking a little bit about the cast, and I know you have a list of some of
Yes.
these actors. We had said it was stacked. Obviously, at the top of the list, Daniel Day Lewis as Abraham Lincoln. There's a story that said that he was sent the script for Lincoln, I think multiple times, and at
Mm-hmm.
first kind of turned it down, and then Spielberg's like, you are the only person that
Yeah.
can play this role. Um,
Spielberg spent 12 years developing this movie, is what I read. He spent 12 years developing the movie and had Daniel Day Lewis in mind from the beginning to play Lincoln. And Daniel kept turning it down, turning it down. And so at one point, um, Liam Neeson was attached to this role for a number of years to play Lincoln.
I have a
And
certain particular set of emancipation proclamations.
but no, like Liam Neeson spent years like doing research and developing this. Like he was granted special access to through like the Library of Congress and like Lincoln's various memorial
Right.
sites and what have you, and collections of his writings, his belongings and things. And so Liam Neeson did a great deal of research and preparation for this, and then he backed out because he felt like it was taking so long to get going that he would have been too old to portray Lincoln. And so once that happened, Spielberg, I can't remember if Spielberg, I heard him tell the story or if it was Daniel Day Lewis, but Spielberg like showed up at his house in Ireland and was like, "I'm not leaving till you take this role." And Spielberg or Daniel Day Lewis finally relented and took the role. And I mean, he went on to win an Oscar for it, so obviously, dude did something right. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, I
it's
think
a
the next
masterful performance.
he low key is nominated every time he acts,
Yeah.
like every time. And man, that's interesting that it took 12 years to kind of develop because that would have been right after Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
That he kind of started that. Tom Hanks is Abraham Lincoln. Now, Now there's a young Mr. Lincoln remake right there. Tom
Honestly,
Hanks.
I wouldn't be upset about that. I mean, obviously
Like
you
a
can't do it now
late
because he's
90s, or
yeah.
sorry, early 90s to mid 90s Tom Hanks playing a young Abraham Lincoln.
I would buy that.
America. Yeah. Yeah, I would totally be here for it. But um obviously Daniel Day-Lewis wasn't the only person in here.
Yeah,
Sally
I
Field is
mean,
another one. Yeah, go
all
down the list.
yes, I there was so many I felt compelled to write down everyone that I noticed in this film. Daniel Day-Lewis playing Abraham Lincoln, Sally Field, who also was nominated for an Oscar, playing Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's wife. David Strahan, who one of my favorite like character actors, low key. Like
I really like him.
everything he's in, I'm just like he made this better. He made
Remember
this
when
so
he
much
played
better.
God?
Yes,
He was like
that
Loki really good.
that
Like,
was low key really good.
yeah.
Um, but he plays Secretary of State William Seward, who William Seward actually was in 1860 the favorite to be the Republican nomination for president. He was governor of New York. He was pretty much like the highest profile Republican at the time, and the fact that in 1860 he wasn't the Republican nominee like shocked America really. Um, and part of Lincoln's political cunningness, he made him Secretary of State, and Seward is probably one of the better known and probably has the better track record as Secretary of States in the nation. I mean, he bought Alaska. Alaska was known as Seward's Folly, because we were like, what's this frozen wasteland for? And then we found golden oil there and said, hey,
He bought Alaska.
he did. He bought it from the Russians.
Oh, hey, honey, what did you do today?
I bought Alaska.
I bought some land. How much land? Basically, like a whole state's worth. Over. It's kind of like Russia, but now it's in America. What's America? I don't know.
Whatever I buy.
Whatever I buy is America. William Stewart.
Yes. But
That's
okay. Who next? Bruce McGill, another really good character actor, plays the Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays Lincoln's oldest son, Robert Lincoln. Hal Holbrook, who I believe it was the miniseries North and South back in, I want to say, the 80s or the 90s, Civil War miniseries. Hal Holbrook played Abraham Lincoln in that. But he plays Preston Blair, one of the kind of founders of the Republican Party, in this movie. James Spader plays a very funny and gruff W.N. Bilbo, one of the guys procuring the votes from congressmen.
When your last name is Bilbo,
yeah,
I mean you're automatically a clown. Like,
apparently, I read a story somewhere that Spielberg told James Spader, "Be as nasty as possible."
he Loki is.
Yes, but he's funny.
He's so funny.
One of probably this is my second favorite performance. It's up there in my top three of this movie. Tommy Lee Jones as Thaddeus Stevens, representative from Pennsylvania. Incredible
so
performance.
Good. So good. He's so good.
The moment when he goes on to Lincoln about how people like think he's a downright despicable, nasty person, and he's like, he says something about how people think he's ugly, and he's like, "You should see me without my wig."
I was like, Professor X.
Honestly, yeah, a little bit. David Constable plays Representative James Ashley from Ohio. Jared Harris, donning an American accent, playing Ulysses S. Grant, which I know you didn't care for that accent.
It took me out of it. He's a brilliant actor in everything. In everything I've ever seen him in. He's fantastic. But my guy needs to stick to the British accents. One, it makes him seem more menacing and smart.
Yeah.
But two, it just did not. I don't know. It kind of took me out of the movie just.
It didn't bother me because this was, I think, the first thing I'd seen him in. Because I saw this when it came out in 2012.
Right.
A young 14-year-old Jake in the movie theater saw this. So it didn't really bother me, but hearing him talk now, I'm like, oh, that's quite a bit different, and I can see how it's not the greatest. Anyways, David Oyelowo plays Corporal Ira Clark, one of the black soldiers towards the beginning of the movie. Adam Driver's in this, plays one of Lincoln's military aides, Samuel Beckwith. And then Lee Pace, who you might know him as Ronan from the Guardians of the Galaxy, the first movie. He plays a representative from New York, Fernando Wood. And then Peter McRobbie, the Honorable George Pendleton from Ohio.
Right.
So
and I mean, you also have Dane DeHaan.
Yeah,
is in this movie. That's pre Valerium and Amazing Spider-Man 2. And then you also have Walter Goggins, or Walton Goggins. Anyway, either way, I think he's a great character actor as well. I really got a kick out of him. I love seeing him pop up in things. But no, yeah, like you said, the cast is stacked, great performances all around.
And I think the true testament is this: like, no one outshines anyone. Like,
yeah.
Lincoln, Daniel Day-Lewis' performance as Lincoln is obviously like the driving force and the shining star of this movie. But I think everyone plays off him so well, and Day-Lewis doesn't upstage anyone, right? I think they all mesh really well as a cast.
Yeah, I agree. So. I know one other thing that you had talked to me about, and we actually haven't really talked about this. You said you had some thoughts on the cinematography in this movie.
Yeah,
there are some classic Spielberg kind of like dolly shots.
Yeah.
But other than that, it kind of seemed a little interesting.
It was honestly a shot composition on this I thought was good. But there were some choices made that I don't know. It almost didn't feel like a Spielberg movie to me a little bit.
I agree.
And I think they purposely went for, I think, a different look, especially when it goes to lighting. And I don't know if you would attribute this to lighting or post-production or what have you, but it's got, the air seems thicker, right? It seems grainier a little bit, but not your traditional.
That's the lighting, especially like indoors when Seward is smoking a cigar and that one guy's like, "Hey, I got like emphysema."
Yeah,
like, I don't care. Like you could see the smoke billowing, and that kind of soft light really accents that, and that is something I noticed too. Yeah,
it's really, it reminds me in a lot of ways of like Civil War photographs, that era of photography. And it's like there's almost, that grain almost seems to remind me like how there's like blemishes in those photos, because obviously they're like so old.
right.
And photography processes were this was kind of really the beginning of photography, at least mass produced photography. And so it has that quality to it, which seems like something I would enjoy, but I didn't necessarily.
Yeah. And
it's like the cinematography, like, it didn't get in the way of the story for me, but it was just kind of there.
If you wouldn't have told me that Steven Spielberg directed this movie, I probably wouldn't have been able to guess it.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I said, there are some camera shots that are classic Spielberg, but heck, if I were to ever make a movie, I'd probably throw in those shots because they're awesome. So I think, I don't know, the one other thing that I noticed when it came to the camera work, they shot profile on Lincoln a lot, which I kind of thought, obviously that was a choice and I kind of liked it. They did this one thing, it's multiple times in the film where it kind of pans across.
Yeah.
From like more profile to kind of, but it's like down low too. It kind of pans across and up, but you obviously see the side of Lincoln's face, and everybody knows the side of Lincoln's face from Pennies, which will be discontinued, I'm sure, in like 20 years. But yeah, that's definitely something I noticed as well. But it's a different outing for Spielberg.
I don't remember. I wish I would have wrote down the name. I didn't. Because I looked up the cinematographer on this, the director of photography, because I was like, did like he pick someone different? Because like I said, it wasn't feeling necessarily like a Spielberg film to me. And this is someone who I think had collaborated with Spielberg since like Saving Private Ryan. Like he's
Yeah,
got
he has a cinematographer he uses on all
yeah,
of
I
his.
can't think of the guy's name, but it's that guy. And I was just kind of like, I wonder, I wonder what the choice was, why they were choosing to do things um a little differently here. Like I
Yeah.
said, maybe they're going for a more, kind of replicate that Civil War photography look. Um, but I felt like it was if there's one thing that this movie fell a little flat for me, it was cinematography and lighting.
Okay, so before we do Rosebud and Thorn, I also wanted to talk a little bit about box office. The thing I thought was interesting about this had like a worldwide release,
Mm,
which for a movie about the Civil War, it doesn't seem like it makes sense. And also at the same time, yes, it is a Spielberg film,
yeah.
and he has clout for sure. But uh, the fact that they released it all over the world and it made money, it it ended up grossing a total of $275 million worldwide, um, and it pretty much split 1/3 international, 2/3 domestic. But I just thought that was really interesting
Yeah.
because I think that also speaks to the myth,
Hmm.
right, of Abraham Lincoln. Even these other countries
Yeah.
that aren't America and didn't have Abraham Lincoln as president, he's just so
Right.
well known everywhere. I thought that was really really interesting.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, obviously, like Lincoln, he's an American president, but at the same time, like he plays, I think, a significant part in world history too, right? Um, through, you know, how the Civil War affected like American relations abroad, especially with Europe and France, or Europe and France,
I was gonna
Britain
say,
and
yeah, because
Britain and France. They were two kind of the two superpowers that were kind of sitting off on the sidelines. And during the Civil War was this whole, do they get in, do they get out, or are they staying out?
right.
Like, and that stuff. So I mean, it is very much an American story, right? But I think uh, probably because it is a Steven Spielberg movie and it has clout, he has clout around the world. Um, that's probably why it did so well internationally, and it's a
It's
wonderful
just
story.
good.
It's fascinating.
And
Yeah,
yeah, storytelling is storytelling.
right.
And I think he's a great visual storyteller. And
Yeah.
so even the other countries, like it was released, the latest release was in April of the, so it released in November
Mhm.
because it was an awards contending film. Um, and then in April of that next year, so a few months after, it was released in Japan. I don't know why it must have just almost gotten lost, overseas,
Mhm.
because I'm sure they shipped it on a
Yeah.
ship. Also Serbia, it took a long time to get to Serbia, but
Hmm.
you know, where even is Serbia? Um, is that like Disturbia? Okay, I'm done. Uh, Jake, Rosebud and Thorn. What are your
Um.
Rosebud and Thorn for this film?
So I don't have a thorn, but my rose.
Big shock.
Yes, I don't have a thorn on a movie I picked. This is literally like one of
About
my
your favorite subject.
when I tell you this is like one of my favorite movies. This is one of my favorite movies. Like it's a movie that really I can just like, I'm in a bad mood, I'm gonna watch Lincoln. I'm in a good mood, I'm gonna watch Lincoln. I'm bored, I'm gonna watch Lincoln. I'm anxious, I'm gonna watch Lincoln. Because there's something so good about this movie, so comforting. And really, okay, I'm gonna get to Rosebud and Thorn here, but kind of tangent. This is a significant film for me, at least in like my journey as a storyteller, I think,
Hmm.
because this was obviously I knew I liked Steven Spielberg. as a kid. His movies were fun. You know,
Yep.
I grew up watching Indiana Jones and E.T. and stuff like that.
You know how
So
many people have not seen Indiana Jones that are our age? It's a crime.
too many
That's like
people.
federal prison.
Too
Everybody that hasn't seen
straight to
it, federal
jail.
prison.
Straight to
Yeah,
jail.
straight to jail. Don't collect 200. You don't go past go. I mean,
Yeah.
anyway, that's tangent on a tangent. Um, but yes, please continue.
But I remember I have this visceral memory of 14-year-old me going to see this in the movie theater. It was with my mom, and I think it was one of her work friends that wanted to see it, so we went together. And like I literally on the edge of my seat during the passage of the 13th Amendment, and I know it's going to pass. It's literally an amendment to the Constitution. It's there. I know what's going to happen, and I am on the edge of my seat because I'm that sucked into this film. I'm enjoying it that much. And this really is kind of the film that started my tradition of watching the Oscars and falling in love with the Oscars, because I loved this movie so much, and it was nominated for, you know, a number of Academy Awards, that I was like, I have to watch the Oscars. And I was low-key very upset when Tommy Lee Jones and Sally Field didn't win Oscars.
Yeah,
I
Tommy
believe,
Lee Jones should have won.
I believe Steven Spielberg was also nominated for Best Director and didn't win, and I was upset.
You'd be like, he only has two Oscars.
I
One of
know.
them's for directing, and one of them's for
Best,
screenplay.
no, it's a Best
No,
Picture.
best picture. Oh
Yeah,
yeah. But other than that, like he's
it's a
literally one
crime.
of the goats.
It's a crime.
Yeah, federal prison,
Federal
federal
prison, straight
prison.
to jail.
Yeah,
Um,
Guantanamo Bay. Send him straight. No,
yes.
um, sorry.
Anyways,
This just reminded me of one of our earlier practice recordings. I guess we had a whole, you know what I'm talking about. We
yes.
had a whole aside about OJ because we talked about. I said, Ford's
OJ
Theater,
Simpson, not orange juice.
right? Um, because Ford's Theater is where Lincoln got shot, and so I said, "Man, aren't you glad that like Charles Chevy, it wasn't like Chevy's Theater, because then Chevy cars would have a bad reputation." And then you said something like,
Well,
"Well,
because
the Ford Bronco." I said
you
Bronco.
said something about a Ford Bronco, and I was like, well, Ford Bronco's already kind of a bad rap. But
Yeah.
we're not going to talk about low speed car chases on LA freeways.
And then I said, "He definitely did it." Like we like kind of had moved on, and then I was just like, "He did it."
We spent like a whole like
When you write a book called "If I Did It," that's that's just wild. But yeah, no, OJ did it. Now back to Lincoln.
yes. What were we talking? Rosebud Thorn. Okay,
Rosebud
we're
Thorn.
gonna get on track here. My rose is okay. I'm gonna have two roses here. My first one is gonna go to the cast, because I think this is a wonderful ensemble performance. Everyone flows together nicely. They support each other. They build off each other. They have incredible chemistry together. I think top to bottom, this is an incredible. It's incredible performances by the whole cast. And then separately, I'm going to give a rose to Daniel Day-Lewis for his portrayal as Lincoln, because this is a masterclass in historical acting, right? Portraying a historical figure and making it still feel fresh and new and vibrant. He adds so much to Lincoln. He supports this mythical figure that we know Lincoln to be, while adding an incredible amount of depth that is supported by so much research and discovery and academic study of Lincoln. He blends these two things together masterfully. And so I'm going to give a rose to him as well. My bud is going to be the cinematography, as we've discussed already.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think it was bad. It just wasn't good. And I think this movie succeeded on so many fronts, so many levels, that when I went looking for the cinematography, I was let down by it, if that makes sense, right? It didn't stand out to me that it was bad.
Right.
I didn't
Right.
see things that were wrong, let's say. I just thought, when you're going through this and analyzing the different aspects of this film, that was kind of a letdown for me. So that's going to be my bud, because I thought it could have been better. So, and like I said, I
Yeah,
have no Thor because I love this movie too much.
I for me, I think honestly, a rose. Obviously, you said Daniel Day Lewis, but Tommy Lee Jones,
Mhm.
he stole every scene. He stole every scene he was in. He was so good, and he has this way of speaking where he talks like really fast. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's not all the time, but there's this line that he says about does he think like a white man and a black man are completely equal? And the way he answers that, he says it so quick. I had to
Yeah,
rewind. I was like, what did he say? And I have subtitles on, and I was like,
that
what did he say?
I know exactly
Um,
the scene. It's when he's
I hope
before the
so. We
house.
just finished it.
It's
We just finished
before
watching the movie.
it's before the house. This is probably his best scene. It's kind of his climax in the movie. It's before, when he takes the floor to argue the amendment before the House, and Fernand or the he's from New York, Fernando Wood. He's trying to get Thaddeus Stevens to say what Thaddeus Stevens had gone on record and said hundreds of times before, was that he believed in racial equality, which
Right.
was an absurd concept at the time. Like, whether you like slavery or not, no white person believed that a black person or any non-white person was of equal status. They just the argument was that even if they're not equal, we shouldn't make them slaves, because slavery is evil. Um, and so, in order to not in order to get the amendment to succeed and not scare away any lukewarm representatives that have, crossed the picket line and are coming around to vote for the amendment, he has to swallow his tongue and say, I do not believe in the equality of all things, only the equality before the law.
Right.
And
He
he
says
he, he
he's
says
like,
it he says it as
I
one
do not
word.
believe all of the law.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Yeah.
And
And
go ahead.
I know I think specifically like because he has a line after that where the guy essentially is like, look, I'll say whatever I need to say to get this passed,
Yeah.
essentially. And I thought that that kind of mentality, I mean, that very much is like Lincoln too.
Mm-hmm.
I think like Lincoln probably it would be maybe a little bit, I mean, he would have said it differently, but I that kind of shrewd political maneuvering
Mm-hmm.
that he does, I mean, that scene was spectacular. Spectacular.
I also love that scene because he looks at one of his opposing representatives and tells him he is more reptile than man. So low to the earth that the foot of man cannot crush you. But even dishonorable, unworthy you ought to be treated equally before the law. That
I was like, that sold me. That sold. I mean, I was already sold, but that
yeah.
sold me.
And
Now,
the way he said, you are more reptile than man, George.
um, my question for you is that true to life? Is that kind of was he
Um
like that savage?
Thaddeus Stevens was like one of the most radical members of Congress
Okay.
at the time. He after the war, he is one of he is the one, or I shouldn't say the one. He is one of the members of Congress that is pushing, for the enfranchisement of slaves. He pushes through the 14th and the 15th Amendment, um, giving giving black people the right to vote, the 15th Amendment,
Right.
and equal protection under the law of the 14th Amendment. I think I got that right. Might have to
I
look
believe
that up.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Basically, he's the one that like is pushing for protections for former slaves. He is the one that is pushing for um, the 40 acre and a mule
Yep.
policy during Reconstruction. For every former slave was to be given 40 acres of seized Confederate land and a mule to start Homeland. This is it's a handout from the federal government. He's the one behind all this, right? So
Right.
he truly did believe in racial equality and was the one pushing things forward in Congress. Does he swallow his tongue like this like he does in the movie? Does he swallow his tongue to squeak by the amendment? I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at congressional record and debate for this amendment.
Here's the
But
thing. He would.
I
Jake would do that.
I probably would if I had more free time. I would look
You're
up.
the reason why I know what Robert's Rules is.
I have a copy of Robert's
I know
Rules.
you have a copy of Robert's Rules
on that top shelf, right next to my hymnal. Which that just sums up everything you need to know about me.
Yeah, that is. Yeah,
the fact that I have a hymnal and a copy of Robert's Rules of Order.
Was it you or Tanner C that carried a hymnal in their backpack?
I did.
Yeah, all the time. Elite.
It gives me comfort.
Back to
yes.
Well, we're talking about Rosebud and Thorn. Yeah. So obviously that I'd say a bud for me. This is more personal. This is like heavy duty stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a politician and I'm not as well versed in poli-sci as you are. And so it was a little confusing. Obviously, I got the point, but mm-hmm. some of the things they said, and that's another reason why I struggle with period pieces a little bit, is because I don't exactly understand everything they're going for. Like, even in the original, or even in like episode 1 of Star Wars, I had no idea for the longest what the heck a blockade was and what was going on with the separatists. I didn't understand it. I like for a long time till I watched Clone Wars, and then it made sense. But my point is that for me, the script left a little bit to be desired, or the way in which the story was told. It was very, accurate to the time period, but I struggled to kind of understand what it was. So that would be my bud. I don't really have a thorn.
Because it's that good.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It really is that good. Yeah. So now the question is, who do we think each other are? I have an answer.
I have an answer as well. Yes. Okay. I think you are. I think you're Representative James Ashley, played by David Constable. He's the one. He's the bill sponsor for the 13th Amendment. You following who I'm talking about?
For the folks at home who may not know, go ahead. And there's so many people in this movie.
There is a lot.
There's so many people.
He's the one that okay, go to the scene, think with me, to the scene where Tommy Lee Jones is up there speaking.
Yeah.
Right before that scene, there's a congressman that comes to Tommy Lee Jones's desk as he's getting ready to take the floor and say, "Believe, for the love of God, say you believe in equality before the law, not racial equality, if you want this amendment to pass."
Okay, yeah, that guy.
Yeah. He's also the one that he's having a meeting with Lincoln and finds out that there's a Confederate peace delegation coming to Washington and flips his lid.
Yeah.
That guy. He that's my pick for you. Why? I don't really know. I think okay.
Right.
Put it this way. I think that he is very passionate, and how do I want to say this? He's very passionate and is very much a leader, but he knows that he needs to rely on other people for help, right? He knows he needs to have good people around him that can help him achieve his goals. He knows that the passage of the 13th Amendment is not something that he can push through by himself. He has to deal with the president and his Lincoln's tactics to try and poach some voters. He has to deal with the radical Republicans under Thaddeus Stevens. He has to deal with that faction. But at the same time, the conservative faction of the Republicans under Preston Blair, you see how Holbrook up in the rafters during the debate, nodding and shaking his head at different things.
Right.
and there's a few congressmen that are taking his keys from him. He knows he has to work with these people, and he's able to work with these people to get this thing passed. And I think you are a person that you like to take charge and lead the charge, but I think you know that you need to surround yourself with people who are different from you, and they're going to help you achieve your ends. So that is
Very,
why.
very much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I mean, I thought maybe you were going to say Abraham Lincoln because I talk in stories all the time.
You do talk in
Um,
stories.
yes. And I also talk like this.
Talking about whenever you keep talking
That was
about
like
how
Bill Clinton and like anyway.
that was more Clinton than Lincoln. But you talk about how every time you've mentioned how Lincoln talks in stories, I think of the scene when Lincoln's sitting in the war room and Edwin Stanton's
Oh,
like
I
ripping
love
out
this
his
scene.
beard, and Edwin Stanton's like, "No, you're gonna tell a story. I can't take another one of your stories right now," and like storms out and everything.
That I love that scene. He's just so good.
So good.
For me, it's gotta be for you, I should say.
Mhm.
It's gotta be Thaddeus Stevens.
Really?
Yes. I don't know. I like because he's passionate. He's passionate about it. Um, he also is like really smart on the floor. Also, what an OG for saying, "Can I see the bill?" He goes, "Yeah." And then he's like, creases it. He goes, "I'll get it back to you tomorrow, creased." And the guy's like, "What?" They took it home. But no, I just from the moment he's smart as a whip, but he also just like knows this stuff, and it just really reminded me of you, and I could see why you'd like that character. Obviously, I like that character. Um, but yeah, I mean, final thoughts. We've both said it. Great film.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. It's one that I would recommend everybody to see.
Yeah. I
Um,
think you brought up kind of your bud. Is that this is a little confusing and a little dense to follow, and it is. I can say this even, I'm a history and a politics nerd. Like I've read Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, all 700 pages of it, because I'm fascinated by this stuff and I enjoy it. Even still, there were times this rewatch, I've seen this like how I haven't worn out my DVD by now, like it is kind of a miracle of physics. Like I love this movie so much. But even still, this rewatch, there were things that I never noticed before that I picked up on. There were things that Lincoln said that I finally understood. There were things, decisions that were made that I finally understood. And so I think this is just a wonderful movie. It's an enjoyable movie. It's an important movie about a very important period in our history. And I think this is a movie that I would encourage everyone to watch. And if you enjoy it, watch it again. There's going to be something new that you're going to pick up on that you missed the first time.
and honestly, do like a double feature of that and Young Mr. Lincoln, because
Honestly, like
that whole conversation blew my mind that
I'm
we
not
just
even
had.
in school and I want to go write this paper.
Yeah, I mean,
I
and
want
just
to
send it
write
to
this paper.
Wes.
Yeah. So I want to write this paper and send it to Dr. Wes Gehring, our
Yeah,
former professor. I
yeah,
wrote a paper about comparing and contrasting John Ford and Frank Capra's populist
yeah,
stances for Wes's class.
yeah, yeah. That I remember you talking about that.
I think I had you proofread that paper too.
Probably, probably. I proofread a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, great film. Highly recommend it. Next week, what are we watching next week? Well, it's
It's your
my
pick.
pick, and I've been sitting here the whole time because I have three different things I want to watch. Um, so we are going to be watching The Prestige.
Okay.
Have you seen that?
Yes. I just saw it a couple months ago. My roommate Tanner introduced me to it. It's one
You want to know why he
I want to watch.
introduced you?
Why?
Because I introduced it to him. It's great, and
It
also
is good, and it's also I'm excited that we're picking this because it's one I want to watch again because I feel like there was stuff I missed.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and this is a Christopher Nolan film. The first time I watched it, I was blown away. It's excellent. He does a lot of great stuff. So we're gonna be watching that next week. But first, in the comments, so we obviously didn't touch on everything that had to do with Lincoln, the movie, or the person, or the populist figure. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. We want to hear from you. And if you've seen this movie, if you haven't, all your thoughts down below for sure. If you like this video, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button, ringing that bell to get all notifications on upcoming content. Obviously, Jake and I have plenty more videos for you, including hopefully a whole OJ rant that we're going to put out separate.
Oh,
And
mercy.
I
We
know.
we should just have a sub episode, call it "The Juice is Loose," and it's our rambling about OJ.
What I should have done like next Naked Gun was our like next movie.
We can never do an OJ Simpson movie because we will spend an hour and a half talking about how like insane it is that OJ killed his wife and his wife's lover and is not in jail for it for life.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Uh but for Jake Miller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, make sure to follow us on social media. That will be available somewhere around here. And we will see you next week for The Prestige. And cut.